Well, I started out saying that
Yes.
when I spoke at Al Lowen's memorial service, the first thing I did was ask people to take off their shoes and stand on their feet. Because I think that's a major contribution that he made to psychiatry. I don't think any other psychiatrist ever insisted that people stand on their feet. And I recall the time when I went to a workshop that Al gave, and he had us standing on our feet for 3 hours. I think that was after John and he split up, John Pierakis, and I think he wanted to be able to stand on his own feet alone. I'm not sure. I mean, that's my speculation. But I think it's very useful, and I like to see my clients how they stand, how wide their stance is or how narrow, because people who bite off more than they can chew often take a very wide stance for their height, and people who don't take up their space in the world tend to keep their feet very close together. So I had this poor audience stand while I spoke. I quote Al often. I say my teacher said, "A cry a day keeps the doctor away." You know, because I have all these men in my practice who were taught not to cry. But also what Al did, he reinvented a lot of stuff that other cultures were already doing. But a lot of what he does is similar to yoga. He was in favor of not having breathing be done. It should happen. And I agree with that. But sometimes you have to do it in order for it to happen.
So what would you say is the difference between bioenergetics and body psychotherapy? Or is there?
That's a really good question. Because the body psychotherapy group includes a lot of people whose work grew out of Al's work or Reich's work. But it also includes people who came up through the Barbara Brennan School of Touch. It also includes dance therapists and a lot of what I consider somewhat peripheral. But the board of the Body Psychotherapy Group was willing to institute research awards for research. I mean, it's a small incentive because what do we give? I think we give $500 for the first prize and $100 to the students. Well, that's not a huge incentive. But the recognition by a group, or even the incentive to do some decent research which could be published in a peer-reviewed journal. Anyway, I am interested in action. So when I speak at the October conference, I'm going to have an action. I'm going to ask somebody to volunteer to be an actioneer and to take down the things we commit ourselves to doing, not just theorizing about, to bring body psychotherapy or bioenergetic analysis into the mainstream. And of course, research is the main way to do it. Well, I finally gave up on bioenergetics because they wouldn't do any research or back it. So I finally joined the board of the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy, which leads me to, I mean, because of the recent findings of neuroscience, they back up totally what we do. And so we have a golden opportunity to get it into the mainstream if we want to get it into the mainstream. I personally think every social worker, every nurse, every physician should have some knowledge of body psychotherapy. And I'm not going off into the dance therapy and all the associated things, but they should know a little bit about who we are is demonstrated in what we look like and how we move and what our expressions are. They did institute research, and people did apply for the awards, and most of the people who won were bioenergetic analysts in Europe, because they had to do research because they don't get paid in Europe if they're not in the recognized group. And so to be in the recognized group, they had to do good research. So they were the recipients of our award, almost exclusively bioenergetic. So coming back to the actioneer, what I'm going to talk about is how we're going to get, I believe we need to have an integrated health system where doctors work with psychologists and psychiatrists and acupuncturists and chiropractors. And I want us to get into the mainstream that way. And because of the recent findings in neuroscience, I think we have the background to do it. So I'm going to ask the audience to come up with some ideas about how we're going to move into the mainstream with this opportunity. And the Actioneer is going to take those things down, and then we're going to assign people to do it, because I'm an activist. And I have been since I met Al Lowen, because it was I who suggested that he should form a not-for-profit organization. And I did that because my stepfather had been a very prominent oral surgeon, and he had an Institute of Clinical Oral Pathology, and I saw what that could do. So I suggested that they have this, because Al had been giving lectures, and I had been introducing him. And I thought, you should collect money for a not-for-profit institution that does lectures. So that's how it started, and I donated the first $500. I hired Robert Sturz, who was on the original and the original board. He suggested not to form a corporation but a trust, which was a good idea. And he drew up the papers. And then, again, this is action. Al wanted to get a book out, and I knew Henry Stratton of Bruna and Stratton, so I introduced them, and he published Al's first book. Al Lowen really believed that if he didn't personally experience it, it didn't exist. I think I gave you the illustration. From his response to my work, is a chapter in our book, The G-Spot, about female ejaculation. It's not something that happens to everybody. It doesn't need to happen to everybody, but it does happen to some women. And people didn't know what it was. They thought maybe they were urinating. They sometimes operated on women for it. It's important to know that some women at the time of orgasm ejaculate. And they're not peeing, and they don't need to be operated on, and they don't need to be ashamed of it. But everybody doesn't need to try to do that. We're all different. So I had lunch with Al, and he said, well, I made love to a number of women, well, a few women, he said, and none of them ever ejaculated, so I don't believe it exists. So that was both one great asset of his, that he really wanted to know personally what something was. But it was also a blind spot, because we don't all experience everything. And he didn't take into account the fact that he was the lover in all these cases. And that not all women ejaculate, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.